Jackie, are there a couple of things that we could do to become more news literate? I mean, I think of myself as pretty news literate, but every so often I'll see a tweet or something that I think is real and almost retweet it. And then it's just sick to myself, oh, maybe I should just check and make sure that's an accurate thing. Sometimes it's not. So there's that kind of problem of false information out there. And then there's just not understanding the information that's in the paper. Anything we could do, just simple things?
Yeah, there's a lot of different resources that I can definitely push out when this is over. From Pointer, or there's a bunch of nonprofits now that are popping up to provide that sort of guidance for teachers as well. But that process that you just outlined of pausing and taking a moment, realizing that you have a huge platform that reaches millions of people, and that it's probably not the most responsible thing for you to do, to retweet something that gives you pause. That's a process I think that everyone should go to, especially those who do have a platform and some influence. But, I also think it is our responsibility. I talk about this all the time, actually, with my friends, even, to really differentiate the difference between, opinion columnists, news analysis, and just straight hard news. A lot of people don't really make that distinction. And sometimes media outlets also, really blur those lines. And so I think that journalists that cover the White House especially, we all have an obligation to, try to really adhere by that and stick to the highest standards.
Before we all go, I really want to ask both of you about something you're thinking about, which is youth engagement in the 2020 election. I mean, even before COVID, this struck me as easily the most important election in my lifetime, and my lifetime's longer than yours. And now it's even more and more important. So how are we doing in terms of youth engagement politically? Jackie, I know you covered the 2016 election, so maybe we'll start with you and see what thoughts you have.
Actually, this brings me back to the 2018 election, where we saw, 125% increase in youth voting compared to 2014. 2016 wasn't if you compare 2016 to 2012, it wasn't as strong, but 2018 really, I think, was encouraging in terms of seeing that if you put in the resources, you put in the effort, all of these young activist groups like March for Our Lives that had popped up, it really made a difference. And I think a lot of people assumed that would carry over to 2020. It's really the bet that Bernie Sanders made in the Democratic primary. However, he didn't quite see that come to fruition in the way that he thought, which I think caused some alarm amongst progressive youth organizing groups. And I think the pandemic has put an even bigger wrench into that. But that being said, young people are captive to their phones, especially right now when we're mostly all living online. So you have groups like Voto Latino, Next Gen, March for Our Lives, all working overtime to reach people in their personal spaces, nooks and crannies of the internet that they're living in, to try to energize them. And at the same time, I think a lot of young people who are looking for an outlet right now, who are looking for some purpose, who are at home, maybe out of a job and really struggling, there are ways to get involved online in a volunteer capacity, whether that's for a Republican campaign or a Democratic campaign. Finding that community is something that I think can be a really positive influence. And I encourage everyone to participate in democracy, especially right now as we're seeing, the highest leadership in our country go through a serious test of taking care of the American public and the health of the American public.
Gosh, I agree with everything that Jacqueline said. And I think that one of the things that I try to encourage people to do is to look at what's important to them and understand that whatever is important to you is inherently political. and then also to kind of widen out and look at a bird's eye view. So, for example, if people who are, looking at this have been keeping up with the news this week, you'll understand that there was an investigation into why the United States government sold arms to the Saudis and whether or not it was actually above board or legal, and that the person doing that investigation was just unceremoniously fired. If that strikes you as inappropriate, that protecting America and also not proliferating weapons would be something that is, being buried by the government, that's also worth voting for. It may not affect your, day-to-day experience. It may not be the thing that affects your state budgets and whether that's education or the quality of your roads or whatever. But if it concerns you, that's also worth looking at. And I think for me, I'm consistently trying to talk about why we've got to look. It may not feel great, but what I generally have discovered is that the more you're willing to investigate, the more inspired you eventually will become. And so, to Jacqueline's point, for youth turnout, whether it's an organization like March for Our Lives or Voto Latino, whether we're talking about nonpartisan organizations like Represent Us and I Am a Voter, whatever it might be, there is no more important thing to do than to get civically engaged, because anything you look at that is part of your daily life in the world around you exists because of good or bad policy. And if we want to make changes to those things, then we've got to show up and participate. And the thing that bolsters my confidence is that while so many of us have been made to feel like that kind of participation is a chore, I see time and time again people say, I just got politically active this year and I had no idea how inspired I'd be. I had no idea how much I would love this. I had no idea how much I would learn, no idea how empowered I would feel. And that makes me happy. That's the kind of information I want to get out to people is, this is going to surprise you in really great and inspiring ways.
Yeah, and I want to add, the decisions that are being made right now, the decision to actively exclude young people from the CARES Act, the $1 trillion Recovery Act that is providing assistance to millions of Americans across the country during the pandemic, which has really effectively paused the American economy, that's going to affect us for the rest of our lives. So Gen Zers, millennials, worried about becoming a lost generation, worried about job opportunity, student debt, being able to own a house going forward. Now is the time, as Sophia said, to vote on those issues. Make your voice heard if what you're seeing concerns you, if you want greater representation. I think, there are, again, a lot of barriers to voting, whether it's having access to a printer, even to print out a voter registration form, as Neal said, not having a license in order to fill out an online voter registration form, or maybe not even just really understanding, how the whole process works. I would seek out any resources possible. They're out there. They might be difficult to obtain, but don't be shy about asking for help. I think one benefit of the pandemic is that a lot of people are asking for help in ways that, they potentially previously hadn't necessarily been comfortable in doing so. But those resources exist, and make your voice heard.
And I like what both of you are saying, because yes, you're focusing on my question about the election, but you're saying something broader, which is about involvement in policy, not just in the 2020 election or 2018 or whatever. And yeah, 2018, the youth vote was catalyzed in part because of Parkland and guns, and that mattered to the election. But, I've been spending the last few days writing a brief defending all the gun laws in the states that are being struck down as violations of the Second Amendment. And I'm just struck by how much March for Our Lives and these kids have changed the debate by being so politically active and by drawing attention to what is going on in our schools. And so it's not just about elections, it's about policy. And what both of you are doing is just so important in getting people educated, and in particular young people. I can't thank you enough for your work and for being here today. I really, really appreciate it, and I wish you both the best in this difficult time. That concludes episode 6 with Sophia Bush and Jackie Alemany. Thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned next week for more New Normal. And if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button to stay in the know. Or if you're on Instagram, make sure you hit that follow button. Take care.